Hello again, my audience. Today, we are going to talk about political violence. We are focusing on the French Revolution and some of the key crazies that led it. Now, you might think, why would anyone care about the French Revolution? It happened 200 years ago. It is a good question to ask. But the French Revolution and the ideas behind it provided a blueprint for many revolutions to come. The French Revolution formed the basis of the modern left. To provide a quick summary, prior to the revolution there were three estates acting as a kind of caste system in France: the clergy, the nobility, and everyone else. Political power and privilege descended as you went down. The third estate, representing the peasants, middle class, tradesmen, and everyone else, was frustrated at their political impotence. Every time they voted for something, the other two estates would veto their will. In response, key leaders of the Jacobins and other revolutionary political parties broke off from the Third Estate and created what was called the National Assembly. If we look at the origin of the actual word, the left, where did this come from? The leaders of the revolution sat on the left of the assembly, you see, and the monarchist and everyone else sat on the right. This newly declared National Assembly gained legitimacy and power by claiming that sovereignty lay not with the sovereign, the king, but with the people of the nation. This was a well-established idea from Enlightenment thinkers of the time. The National Assembly gained a wide range of support from both the public and even some members of the nobility and clergy. Let us just say that France in 1789 was unstable and ripe for revolution. At the time, France was in economic turmoil. It was still under feudalism with its severe inequality, and Louis XVI was a weak, profligate, and somewhat naive ruler. He thought it was time for a change as well, but he didn't quite realize that he was to be the turkey voting for an early Christmas. Most importantly, the average Frenchman couldn't afford enough food. You see, poor harvests in 1787 and 1788 had caused a shortage of wheat. Profligate government spending and a tax system that exempted nobility and clergy led to excessive printing of government debt. These factors combined to double and then triple bread prices. It was dire indeed. The people of Paris were literally starving. But with great crisis comes great opportunity, and the leaders of the revolution weren't going to let this crisis go to waste. In the century or so before the revolution, a number of clever guys had made some good points in their books. These guys, the fathers of the Enlightenment, came up with revolutionary new ideas of rationality, science, and philosophy, the separation of church and state, secularism, to prevent religious zealots starting wars, and the concept that man had inherent rights regardless of his birth. Most importantly for the revolution, John Locke had conceived the idea that legitimate government was based on the consent of the governed, that is, the people. Now, back to the idea of not letting a good crisis go to waste. A number of key intellectuals led the way for the French Revolution. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, writing the origin and foundation of the inequality among mankind. Maximillian Robespierre, leader of the revolutionary Jacobins and pivotal in creating the Reign of Terror, and Marquis de Sade, helping to incite the storming of the Bastille. Rousseau's work on the inequality among man was a great start to the revolution. In it, he argued that two forms of inequality exist: natural inequality and moral inequality. Natural inequality would be, for example, the size of your penis, and that man should kill his neighbor if his penis is larger than his. The other would be moral or political inequality, created by differences in wealth, power, or social media following. Natural inequality could not be helped, but political inequality arose from civilization, Rousseau argued, and man was happier when he was jacking off, naked and alone in the woods. You see, civilization, law, and government are responsible for all of humanity's ailments. Civilization allows you to have more than a loincloth and a sharpened stick. Monkey cannot hoard coconut if there isn't monkey government and monkey police to safeguard monkey property. It is here, in the creation of monkey civilization, law, and government, that monkey becomes corrupt. Rousseau famously said, "The first monkey who, having found coconut, bethought himself, saying, 'Ooh, ah,' and found other monkey simple enough to believe him, was the true founder of civil society." Rousseau argues that humans were naturally free and equal, but these institutions created artificial inequalities that corrupt monkey and undermine true freedom. Rousseau's other key premise was that a political regime can reshape humanity according to its preconceived ideology. When this inevitably failed, the Jacobins under Maximillian Robespierre decided man could be compelled to equality and fraternity to violence. Rousseau is probably right about one thing. If the year is 20,000 BC, you are wearing loincloth and living in cave, you probably don't have enough stuff to be more privileged than the next guy. Actually, I take that back. Rousseau was paranoid, hypersensitive, and emotionally unstable. Voltaire, a friend and fellow Enlightenment thinker, said the following on reading his discourse on inequality. One longs, in reading your book, to walk on all fours, but as I have lost that habit more than 60 years ago, I feel unhappy about the impossibility of resuming it. On the topic of Rousseau's paranoia, he remarked the following. He longs to be persecuted everywhere, but he is only read and admired. Voltaire mocked Rousseau for romanticizing primitive life and condemning civilization, while enjoying its myriad benefits, in addition to his general misanthropy and disdain towards his fellow man. David Hume, the Scottish Enlightenment philosopher, wrote letters describing his delusions of persecution. It seems that having a victim complex is a common theme among leftist intellectuals. Karl Marx shared a similar problem when it came to paying his debts. Fundamentally, Rousseau created a fairy tale about man to justify his ideology. A masterfully well-written, but ultimately cynical fairy tale, attributing all of man's ills to that which he himself did not possess at the time of writing: wealth, property, friends, and prestige. But enough bashing on the mentally infirm, let's move on to another bright intellectual of the period, Marquis de Sade. He spent some time as a guest in the Bastille. You see, during the Revolution, the Bastille was framed as a symbol of oppression that held poor, underprivileged peasants unjustly imprisoned for declaring prescribed political opinions. In fact, it was a prison with 7 inhabitants at the time of its fall. There were 4 foragers, an Irish-born lunatic and part-time James Bond named James White, and 2 other aristocratic embarrassments imprisoned there on the request of their affluent families. The Bastille had a rather well-equipped kitchen that would serve roast chicken several times a week, a luxury in those times. Our man, Marquis de Sade, had actually been transferred out a week prior to its fall due to concerns of his safety amid the growing turmoil. Now, with a name like Marquis de Sade, you might wonder, did this man have any peculiar hobbies? Well, yes, he did. One of Sade's most famous works was 120 Days of Sodom. It was written during his time in the Bastille. In this groundbreaking literary work, 4 intellectuals hole up in a castle and systematically enact extreme feats of philosophical mastery. No, I'm just kidding. They round up a bunch of teenagers and fuck them in the ass for 4 months. To give you an idea just how revolutionary this work was, I'll draw on a quote from the novel. The salon shall be heated to an unusual temperature and illuminated by chandeliers. All present shall be naked, storytellers, wives, little girls, little boys, elders, friends. Everything shall be pell-mell. Everyone shall be sprawled on the floor, and, after the example of animals, shall change, commingle, entwine, couple incestuously, adulterously, sodomistically, deflowerings being at all times banned. Company shall give itself over to every excess and to every debauch. I can go on, this entire book is just like this. Hailed as a literary masterpiece by furries and leftists alike, the book asked a crucial question of society: what if we all fucked each other in the ass? Such a question shattered the conventional ideas of sex and sent ripples throughout bourgeois and aristocratic circles alike. It was so groundbreaking that local authorities decided to assist de Sade in researching the question further, placing him in the one place where he could really get to the bottom of it: in prison. Fundamentally, Marquis de Sade was a strong proponent for the revolution. In it, he saw the opportunity to free himself from the nuisance of religious and societal conventions that otherwise restricted his lofty libertine aspirations. The Marquis is not the only ideological degenerate on the left, but he is probably the most well-known. The destruction of healthy sexual proclivities has always been a priority of the left. We already have stories that explore such libertine themes. We've had them for many millennia. One is about 2 cities that decided to mock the gods themselves. They came to an apocalyptic climax at the wrong end of an asteroid. onto our next figure. Terror is nothing other than prompt, severe, inflexible justice. It is therefore an emanation of virtue. So said our next character of sound mind, Maximillian Robespierre. That's a pretty severe quote. It's one thing to say it, and another entirely to implement it. He was the despot behind the Reign of Terror, a period when he and his Jacobite friends implemented a politically fueled mass guillotining orgy. Where did such cold-blooded psychopathy come from? When you look into his life, Maximilien Robespierre doesn't seem to have come from a terrible upbringing. His father did leave the family once the mother died in childbirth number 5, but being from the bourgeois of Arras, generations of lawyers and magistrates meant that he and the siblings were split up between their relatives and raised in the comfort of a middle-class household. Certainly, there were many other poor Frenchies that would have loved to have been raised in such standards of relative luxury. He attended the College of Arras and later won a scholarship to College Louis le Grand in Paris, one of the most prestigious schools in France. Throughout his education and later legal career, he excelled in oratory and rhetoric, winning prizes and being chosen to represent various organizations and fraternities. He rose through the ranks in law by choosing to represent parties in prestigious or notorious legal cases. Eventually, he was admitted to the bar, allowing him to practice law freely, and became a judge at the tender age of 25. If sources are to be believed, he resigned 2 years later in 1782, citing his moral opposition to the criminal death penalty. He even gave a famous speech to the National Assembly in 1791 against the death penalty, saying that the death penalty is a crime society has no right to kill. He saw the death penalty as a savagery, unfit for a civilized society. This did wonders for him, gaining a reputation as a man of virtue and moral principle that worked tirelessly to defend humanity itself. There was, of course, one exception to this. It was revealed in 1793 when Robespierre, as leader of the revolutionary Jacobins, instigated thousands of executions of political opponents without legal trial. It only took 2 years for Robespierre to completely flip on this policy of opposition to the death penalty and the right to a fair trial. To go from disagreement to execution is quite a leap, don't you think, and belies a serious psychological impairment. Think about people in your life that you really hate. Now think about laying them on the guillotine chopping block and pulling the lever. Then think about the remorse that you are going to feel on sleepless nights, wondering if maybe you went a little too far. Robespierre not once expressed any kind of remorse for the 3,000 or so colleagues and fellow revolutionaries he executed, not even up until his own execution. But you see, Robespierre was never sincere in his stance against the death penalty. Like every megalomaniacal leftist since, he was simply using it as a means to bolster his reputation as a humanitarian. Every serious leftist is a megalomaniac, whether they know it or not, and they will spin every sub-story, humanitarian crisis, and popular hobgoblin cause in the book to have you believe their crocodile tears, anything to gain your support. Additionally, Robespierre advocated the right to petition, the right to bear arms in self-defense, and the abolition of the Atlantic slave trade. Were any of these sincere? The Reign of Terror that Robespierre instigated from 1793 to 94 was the first moment in the French Revolution when political executions became organized, large-scale, and systematic as a tool of state policy. Now, there were killings beforehand, but mostly spontaneous crowd violence, not systematic state executions. Nor is the Reign of Terror any exception in the behavior of the Jacobins once they had achieved power during the French Revolution. They did many other horrible atrocities, especially to members of the clergy, nuns and priests. But I'm sure there is much about that already on YouTube. Let me tell you a story. When I was a child, my older brother created a large, custom-made Lego model. It took him several weeks to build. I was probably 5 years old at the time and unable to comprehend how he created such a model. Quite indescribably, I found the urge to destroy what he made and promised myself I would be able to build something greater. It was only once the figurine was in pieces that I realized I had no idea what I was doing and didn't really care about it anymore. Those filled with envy possessing no experience of creation, always seem first to choose destruction. You may be starting to see a pattern emerge here. Rousseau, paranoid and delusional, believing that everything around him was the cause of man's woe, despite enjoying the benefits of modernity. The sade, furry, pederast sodomite, longing for a state of anarcho-tyranny when he can indulge his depravity. And Robespierre, a hypocritical, psychopathic megalomaniac, believing any price is acceptable to achieve his political vision of equality and fraternity. This is, unfortunately, a running theme on the left. The left is a faction of the mentally deficient. What they proclaim to stand for is completely arbitrary and second to their goal of authoritarian control. They exist as a modern-day Trojan horse to lull naive morons into a state of vulnerable hypnosis. When they achieve power, the so-called political ideals that they had are thrown aside. The left has never sincerely created anything great, moral, or just. Instead, they have eyed with envy all that others possess or have created, and seek to destroy all that which they cannot recreate. Once they achieve power, all prior principles they ardently defended are thrown out the window, and any disagreement casts a spectre of treason in their paranoid mind. That is all I have for today. Good night. I hope you enjoy.